KNON 89.3 FM in Dallas and Fort Worth, the voice of the people.
Business owners, tell KNON's listeners about your business. You can put your business or event on KNON. KNON currently has space available to run announcements for you. Tell KNON's listeners about your goods, services, nightclub, concert, or event. Help keep the voice of the people on the air while putting your information on the air. KNON's been named the #1 radio station in Dallas by both the Dallas Observer and D Magazine. Put your business with Dallas's #1 station. Call now for more information at 214-828-9500, extension 227. Or extension 233. For more information, go to KNON.org and click on the Run Spots on KNON page. It's a great way for your business to support community radio while letting more people know about you.
Good morning and welcome to Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet, and I'm here in the studio with the late Patti Fink. The dude, Lerone Landis, will be back with us next week.
And it's afternoon. Good afternoon. It is afternoon.
You know, we changed time slots, 6 months ago? I cannot get used to this is afternoon that we're on. I've been saying good morning for how long, and I just can't change that.
1 o'clock is still 1 o'clock.
And, well.
No matter the times, the time change.
Our guest today is the Reverend Jim Mitulski. He is the interim pastor at Cathedral of Hope. We're going to talk about all kinds of E's is the way we put it. Easter, El Salvador, ecumenicalism, equality, evangelism, and we might get in a few other letters also. When I said you're the interim pastor, your church went through what I call tsuris. I think that's a good word for it. You lost your pastor last year at the church, and that was very sudden, and it was really a very painful thing for a number of people there to go through because they were so close with her. But and when I say lost, she's fine. Nothing bad happened to her, but she left very suddenly. And UCC has a particular process, including for a church that's going through stuff, to help the church heal and then move on and give plenty of time to look for a pastor. So describe what it is that you went through.
Well, first of all, David, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm a big fan, and I appreciate the opportunity. So the Cathedral of Hope has had a long history of service in the Dallas community, but a year ago went through some difficulty, internal conflict principally, and one consequence of it is that the pastor at that time, Joe Hudson, resigned honorably and has taken other employment. Mm-hmm. But it was sudden, and because of the history, as many of your listeners probably know, Cathedral of Hope has had continuous leadership from two pastors for over 30 years. Joe was never really elected by the congregation in the conventional sense. Her predecessor, Michael Piazza, who was there for 20-some years, appointed her, and then everyone agreed to it. But it's been over 30 years since they've chosen a leader, and that's a big length of time.
And not just 30 years since they've chosen, 30 years and thousands of members later. I mean, It's really just a whole new.
They were a church of about 300 or 400, say, at the time that Michael Piazza became the minister. Mm-hmm. Still, at that time, in the mid-'80s, the largest gay church in the world, a real trendsetter for people not only in Dallas, but for people all around the country and beyond, certainly in MCC land. They were setting a standard that many people strove to achieve. So that's a very long time, a church of 300 to 400 in the mid-'80s to a church of technically 4,000 or so members in the 21st century. Very different phenomena. So it was time for a reset anyway. I do really believe that the passage of time will show that Joe had a good tenure, her predecessor had a good tenure, and it was time for punctuation. Time to take a break, reset, reevaluate before jumping into the next phase.
And with our theme of ease, you're the ellipsis. That's the
right.
punctuation.
I'm the dot, dot, dot. So, and so one of the things that I do from time to time is that I go to churches that are in transition, sometimes where there's been conflict, and spend time with them, seeing what needs to be reevaluated, seeing what, evaluating the conflict so that we don't repeat it unconsciously, and also seeing not only who they've been, but who do they want to be next, because that's really the important question. And I think Cathedral of Hope embodies a lot of the challenges that many GLBT organizations have, many AIDS service organizations have, and many religious organizations have about what does it mean to be relevant in the 21st century. What gay is different today even than it was 30 years ago, say. And one of the patterns that we see is that young people are they socialize differently than they did in my generation. The men, the women,
Pattie's
the transgender. Yes. There's much more
David.
fluidity, shall we say? More,
Yes.
more comfort, more ease. GLBT is a soup, and straight is part of the soup. So what will that mean? Is there still a need for a separate gay church? I would say, coming from California to Dallas, I wasn't as convinced of the need for a standalone gay institution in the same way that I see now. The culture here means it could be that plus something else, of course. But gay is not over. We're not post-gay. Living in Berkeley, working in Berkeley, California, where I had been, we often would use that expression, oh, we're post-gay. There's nothing post-gay about Texas, and that's what makes it exciting.
And one thing our synagogue did, and I belong to Congregation Beth El Banah, which is formed as the Gay and Lesbian Synagogue, we were having a discussion about who we were, and deciding, and we asked some of our straight members, are you allies? No, we're allies, but that's not why why are you here? Well, because this is our synagogue, we just belong here. So we're not a GLBT synagogue now, we're a GLBTS synagogue. It's just, they're not there as allies. They're there because they just like the place better than they like some of the others that they've been to.
I think gay and straight together is an accurate, it's not a comprehensive definition, but it does describe what we're aiming for. And I think many people still are intentional allies. People, straight couples with children, say that they want to raise their children in a religious environment where there's greater diversity and where they're not taught homophobia as part of their religion. Gay parents with children talk about how it's important to have a place where their children can be with other children whose parents are gay.
But I've talked to some straight people who've gone there, and why do you go here? Well, I like the services here.
Well, we do have the best music in the Dallas-Fort Worth area.
God,
so.
yeah.
By far.
I was there when Bishop Spong was there. Bishop Spong is a wonderful, and I wanted to get him on the show so badly, but we just couldn't arrange it. But he's 84, I believe, and so he's the one responsible for bringing gays and lesbians into the Episcopal Church, and responsible for bringing women clergy into the church more than any other. And it's not one person, but more than any other one person.
And he was really the only kind of modern literature you could get about the topic back in the 80s and 90s.
But when now you think of the Episcopal Church as high church, right? And in the
I've
position,
got nothing on us at Cathedral of Hope.
Well, he
they
stood
could learn
up.
a thing or two from
First
us.
thing he said when he stood up was, I've been to all kinds of Episcopal church. I've never seen anything like this. So
it's true. On Sunday mornings, we like to out Episcopalian the Episcopalians.
Yes.
And then Wednesday night, we like to out Pentecostal the Pentecostals. So we do both. Still with a queer flavor. You wouldn't mistake it for one of their churches either.
But I think there's really a deep need still here in the South. And I was raised a Southern Baptist. I went to Baylor,
Oh, wow.
Jerusalem on the
Hardcore.
Brazos. Yeah,
Yeah.
hardcore. And recovering Southern Baptist now. But I think there really is a continuing, ongoing need that's been there for a long time and will continue to be here for a long time. Where, especially out in some of the Dallas is very progressive. I think it's a blue county, it's a blue city kind of, and progressive. And we have a lot of protections here and such. But if you skirt yourself outward 20 miles or 30 miles or 100 miles, outside this radius, it's bad. It can be very, very bad, and particularly from a religious perspective.
And
so
we reach a lot of people from there who drive every Sunday an hour, even more, to come to be here. Precisely for that reason.
Right, they're getting huge rejection and huge condemnation in their religious faith.
Well, even liberals
some of those areas
here are not that liberal sometimes. The Methodist Church is certainly having its own crisis right now, and you would expect in Dallas there to be, if you'll pardon my observation, greater solidarity with gay people than I think they're exhibiting right now. And this is in 2014. And the Episcopal Church in other parts of the country is a standard setter for integration of gay and lesbian people into the life of the church. But in Dallas, they're still struggling over women clergy. And I'm not saying that that's the only expression of faith, but I do think it speaks to us. Plus, I still think there's a need for separate gay space at times, just like feminism taught us the need for separate space in order to have integrated space. That you need separate space sometimes to find out who you really are, and to purge yourself really of some of the aspects of repression that I think sometimes get unchallenged in a mixed environment.
One of the things that that we found at Beth-El B'nai is, we're 30 years old this year, and the other synagogues always say to us, "Why do you have your own separate synagogue? You're welcome here." And the answer is, of course, we know we're welcome there now.
Now, yes.
And we were always more welcome there than most Christian churches welcome their gays and lesbians. But one of the synagogues here, some of our members wanted to join, but they wanted a family membership. No, we don't have that in our bylaws, but we'll waive certain things. No, we don't want you to waive. We just want you to welcome us as a family. They wouldn't do it, and that's how Beth-El B'nai got started. And now when they ask us, well, why do you have a separate synagogue? We say, we're not separate. We're just another synagogue in town. And same thing in a way with Cathedral.
Tolerating is not the same as indigenous, embracing, celebrating.
Accepting.
And I think there's a whole spectrum, but sometimes you need people on the margin to affect change in the middle. Right. And I think that that's part of what Cathedral of Hope does, and it straddles both. It has its historical roots in the metropolitan community churches, which continue as separate gay churches, and it belongs to the United Church of Christ, a liberal denomination, but it's not exactly like the United Church of Christ. It's more like an MCC than a UCC. Probably get killed for saying that, but the truth is the feel of it in the positive ways, and sometimes some of the challenging ways too. It's definitely one of the questions that the church is asking itself right now. Who do we want to be next? How can we still be strongly, unequivocally, unmistakably GLBT affirming and attract people who are straight allies? How can we further strengthen our outreach or our presence of transgender? That we do okay with gay and lesbian, bisexuals, complex, and with transgender, I would say it's our big growing edge. And there are other important issues. I mean, we live in Dallas, Texas, where I think race is a complex and compelling issue. And I want Cathedral of Hope to be as known for challenging racism internally and externally as it is known for challenging homophobia. So there are ways to develop other aspects of our liberation agenda than just gay. But I don't want to pronounce the gay revolution as having been achieved too prematurely, because it clearly is not.
It's not.
But integrating within the gay and lesbian community is an important thing and going on more and more, and is a challenge for us. So that is a gay issue, I think.
That's true. I think that immigration is a significant issue in the broader culture, of course. But even at Cathedral of Hope, we have 2 Sunday services in English at 9 and 11, and then in Spanish at 1 o'clock. We are already a complex organization that looks like what Texas and California and other parts of the country are going to look like next. And we have to leverage that in a way that I don't think we've fully lived into yet. Again, I hope that Cathedral of Hope is known as a place that is a strong pro-immigrant, sanctuary, safe place as it is around the GLBT issue.
Do you know, one of the strengths can be that I was on the board of the Resource Center during the 90s. And the Dallas Observer named the Nelson Thibodeau Clinic, which is part of Resource Center, best place to get an HIV test, even though it's in the middle of the gay neighborhood. And I went to the board and I said, we are not accepting that award. We're going to take it, and I will write the letter. And I wrote the letter explaining that we're the best place to get an HIV test because we're in the middle of the gay neighborhood, not even though. And if you're coming here, even though we're in the middle, go somewhere else and get your HIV test. We don't care. But we do care. And the reason to go is because we do it. We're the oldest. We're the longest running.
Right.
We've done the most of them, and we do it the best. And while you want every church to be GLBT affirming, you're still the oldest, longest, and you do it the best.
Well,
we hope
yeah,
you continue
that's
doing
what we
the best.
strive for. I mean, we're also a church, and we want to be an effective, lively, spiritual place where people, regardless of their spiritual path, can explore with integrity, where their spiritual lives are. Christianity is kind of a rotten religion when it comes to many things, and I can't even begin to defend it in regard to sexism and homophobia in particular. And we're trying to reinvent it and make it credible for people, because the religious impulse is a healthy, normal one. And we believe something happens there that is liberating not only for us, but liberating for the broader culture too. I was just in El Salvador, where the gay movement there is far more restricted, policed. They live in a much more dangerous day-to-day life, as life in El Salvador can be. And one thing they don't have yet is separate gay churches. The Anglican church there is the one where a lot of gay people go, but there aren't gay ministers yet. And I could see the difference between a self-determined gay spiritual environment and one where you're just welcomed. As part of the evolutionary stage of revolution, I really believe that separate space is necessary. It's permeable separate space, but
right, and it's essential in when we think of things as simple as you're talking about feminism or bullying. If you can't really think about other things until you're in that safe space, and the same is true, say for meal insecurity, food insecurity. You can't really think about progressing in other areas if you haven't had those basic needs. And for someone who's been in a place where, or a space where they're being sort of abused because they're gay, or bisexual or transgender, then they need a place to come to breathe. It's a place to breathe. And I think that's really essential, and I think it will be for a long time to come.
Well, and then the challenge is, of course, to not just focus only on one issue, to not just be concerned about if only gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people were accepted and nothing else needed to change. We have to apply what we're learning from one liberation struggle to another. When I was in South Africa some years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, I met with leaders of the apartheid movement, the anti-apartheid movement, I should say, and was able to question them about what they learned, what they would do differently. And they said that they wished they had also challenged sexism at the same time that they were taking on racism, rather than focusing first and primarily and quite understandably on the end of apartheid and on race. But they said if we had it to do over again, we'd have put equal emphasis on gender. And that really spoke to me, because I think that those liberation movements continue to be patterns for us.
And when the South African government, the new South African government, wrote their constitution, they included all of those things, including same-sex marriage. So.
Well, they have a real human rights-based constitution that's become a pattern, I think, for new society, rather than our continued attempts to remake a flawed document that results in what's going on in Texas with women's ability to get abortion right now. I mean, that's just, it's indicative of what happens when you try to fix rather than remake something. So, I'm hoping that, these other, what may seem tangential to the GLBT liberation movement, the challenging of the defense of women's reproductive rights, pro-immigrant solidarity. I'm hoping that these will be things that politically and spiritually Cathedral of Hope will embrace in the months and years to come.
Yep.
And I have the wrong thing queued up. And we need to take a break. You're listening to, you know what, I'll get that after. I'll just play that. You're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 KNON-fm. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with the late Patti Fink. She didn't go to church this week, but we won't tell anybody. And
I'm not dead.
and the Reverend Jim Mitulski.
But I went twice, so I went for her.
So,
Thank you, Jim.
You know, he's so good. He is so good. We'll be back with more right after this.
It's 6:42 p.m. Time for Steve Plotto and his son Dylan to do the dishes. They talk about everything from the yuckiness of girls to the awesomeness of his soccer team. Sometimes they don't talk at all. Then, hey! The dreaded splash fight. It's Dad o'clock, and it's the best time of the day. Because the smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today. Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for the 2014 appearance of Igor and the Red Elvises? It's the biggest Russian rock and roll party of the year, Friday, May 2nd, when Igor and the Red Elvises come to the Sons of Herman Hall. It will be a night of gold medal, rock and roll fun, and dancing madness, and your only chance to see them in Dallas in 2014. Bear witness and join the happy masses shaking it to the rhythm. Get your tickets now at KNON.org, Bill's Records, or Forever Young in Grand Prairie. Don't miss this, or you'll spend the rest of the year trying to make up for lost fun. Igor and the Red Elvises at the Sons of Herman Hall in Dallas, Friday, May 2nd. Doors open at 7 p.m. for a free dinner while it lasts. The Red Elvises playing 2 sets, all Red Elvises, all night long. For more information, KNON.org. This is a KNON benefit event.
This is William. I download Lambda Weekly podcast from lambdaweekly.com.
And welcome back to Lambda Weekly. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with late Patti Fink, and our guest today is the Reverend Jim Mitulski from Cathedral of Hope. He is the interim pastor. And when we say interim, how much longer will you be here?
Well, I started August 1st, and I expect to be here, I think, to the end of December or the beginning of December, something like that. I could renew, I could leave earlier, but I think that seems about the right time. Usually a year and a half is a good reset time.
Oh,
And you have the church itself has a search committee, correct?
Yes, in fact, they just now started the next phase of that process, which I think will take about 6 months, where they'll be coming up with, it's kind of like coming up with your own personal ad. You know, who are we? Not just demographically, but who do we want to be? What kind of leader are we looking to have? And I think one of the cultural shifts that's very healthy at Cathedral of Hope is a shift from an understandable, and it's worked in the past, but maybe undue emphasis on charismatic leadership, and one that is now more democratically embodied in the church, and more church-driven, where a minister comes and works alongside or with, rather than directs. I think that those other models were more useful in a time, in prior times when the liberation struggle required certain kinds of charismatic leadership. Not that that still can't happen, but I think that there's a strong, healthy desire to be less personality dependent and more congregationally led.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the church certainly has a lot of ministries. I mean, when you think about it, over the years, you've been very supportive of the Medrano Elementary School, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Is the one, and you've had a TV ministry. You've done, all kinds of.
Even
Hope for Peace and Justice is a great ministry, and all kinds of stuff. Gathering food and
even still,
and
important social services are being provided every Saturday morning. Breakfast at Cathedral of Hope, Bach. Breakfast is provided for people, served to them, hot, cooked, fresh on china plates, who are domiciled and undomiciled, and several hundred a week come to that. And then it's a very volunteer-intensive program. And then twice a week, a food pantry is open that allows people to come and receive, modest amounts of food that they can use, whether or not they're living somewhere that has hot water or stoves or things like that, as well as ways to supplement groceries. Those are 2 examples of important things that are, I think, evidence of the cathedral's commitment to economic liberation. Mm-hmm. Again, just being in El Salvador and seeing how the desire to liberate the materially poor was part of that great liberation struggle there. And then coming back here, realizing we have got to incorporate an economic analysis in our liberation agenda, or we're going to become part of the problem. We're going to continue to be part of the problem. So I'm very proud that the Cathedral places a strong emphasis on providing social services for people who, most of whom are not GLBT necessarily, but because they're hungry.
Right.
Right.
Hunger knows no sexual orientation.
That goes back to the, providing an HIV test, even though it's in the gay district.
Yeah.
Well,
But notice how the Dallas Observer is now in the gay neighborhood.
Yeah, exactly. But it's you don't provide this because you're gay. It's one of the things we do because we're gay.
Right.
It's part of who we are. Without saying, yes, this is who we are. Only up to here. You're straight, not interested. Of course we are. Of course we are.
Well, I remember being in D.C. one time for back when I was active with the Human Rights Campaign, and we had a panel of speakers, and one of them was an African American man who said that one of the things we should have been doing kind of in the early 2000s was to couple, like you were talking about with the anti-apartheid leaders, regretting and wanting to do again if they had a do-over, to couple it with sexism, to fight that together. And he really stressed that we should be coupling our liberation and striving for equality with poverty and trying to address poverty. And I still think that's a very relevant thing that we as a community could do, because there's poverty everywhere. If we're everywhere, poverty's everywhere too. And it's
that's right. Our community represents a whole spectrum. And I think our healthcare system right now, while important strides are being made with Obamacare, still in Texas leaves people with HIV vulnerable, particularly at the lowest ends of the economic spectrum.
Absolutely.
And so we have to pay attention to all that. They are interconnected.
Last week at the Interfaith Peace Chapel, somebody from the White House was down. Several people from Out to Enroll were there. They were on our show last week, and Pattie and I went to the event. And the one category that really seems to be missing, by not expanding Medicaid in Texas, there was somebody there who said, I don't qualify for Medicaid, and I don't qualify for a subsidy. Yeah, and so she's caught right in the middle. And she has no health care, and she's.
We have Rick Perry to thank for that, by the way.
Because she would have qualified for the Medicaid expansion. Right. How have you heard at the church? Have you heard many stories of people who've gotten health care, or stories of people who fell into that hole right there?
Well, I can't say that I've talked to parishioners per se in that situation, but I'm aware of it from people in the community who have identified the Medicaid piece. And this is an opportunity for churches to step up. How we ever got to a place in society where we thought it was acceptable to make the health of the human body a profit center anyway, I have no idea. But right now, this is the time for the churches to step up and say, Texas should set a standard with Medicaid, not be at the very bottom. And I think that's true of so many issues right now, that the faith voice is missing, or the faith voice we're hearing is the wrong one to represent the faith perspective on capital punishment, on women's reproductive rights, on health care. There are a lot of people of faith, I think, in Texas who as part of their spiritual lives, believe differently. But we're not seeing it reflected in the social change movement. So I'm disappointed in that, and I'm hoping that, again, this is where Cathedral of Hope, because of its size and visibility, could really make a difference.
And that's probably true, too, because, the Dallas County Commissioners Court has made a move to expand Medicaid in this county. If the governor won't do it, then the Commissioners Court in Dallas County could do it.
Because that's one of those things in the ACA that we're not hearing about. We're thinking of it as Medicaid can only be expanded by the governor statewide, but there's also a provision in there that jurisdictions can expand Medicaid.
And we certainly have, we have a hospital district in this county. We have lots of, and the county is really an extension of state, and all of those things, the legislature passes certain legislation, and then it's executed by the counties on behalf of the state. And So the Dallas County Commissioners Court could absolutely do that. So it might be one of those things where you could work together.
Wow.
Wouldn't that be
collaboration?
Awesome? Yeah.
Coalition. I love it. I'm ready. Sign me up.
It doesn't happen everywhere in the state, but it does. It could happen here.
It could happen here. I'm so impressed with the size of the gay community in Dallas and the complexity and the sophistication of it. I think that, I'm tired of hearing about Austin as the standard for.
No,
liberal.
we have we do new things here all the time. We do the first of everything. We have the first black tie, the first coming
created
out
the
project.
Victory Fund, all these kinds of things.
LULAC,
Now,
Rainbow
but
Council.
You're comparing Austin to Dallas. Last week I was down in Austin. The statewide gay and lesbian Jewish groups meet every once in a while. And so we decided, let's just call ourselves an umbrella name so that when we're doing something, we can just say, we're this group. So we named the group. But the different groups that are that form this were the three. There's Houston. Their group is called Keshet Houston, which means rainbow. Ours is Congregation Beth El Bana, a member of the Union for Reform Judaism. And then a bunch of LGBT people from Austin who happen to be Jewish. That's their group.
There you go.
Keep Austin weird.
So that's the official combination. So yeah, that's Austin. But
that's a big name if you say all three.
You have a big holiday coming up.
Yes, Easter, Holy Week. I'm very excited to be able to be doing that. This will be my first Holy Week at Easter at the Cathedral of Hope. And, we mentioned it earlier, it does have the most amazing music program and resources available because of the size and the momentum. So that means that Holy Week and Easter can really be an exciting, dramatic experience liturgically, musically, spiritually, on a scale that is not always able to be achieved in other places. So we start Holy Week on April 13th with Palm Sunday, and we'll be distributing palms at all of our services and having processions and singing, and then throughout the week, services in Spanish and English variously on Wednesday night, on Thursday night for Maundy Thursday, on Good Friday, 2 services, one at noon and one at night. And the noon service I'm really excited about because we're going to have seminarians from Bright Divinity School and Perkins School of Theology at SMU come and do reflections on the 7 last words of Jesus tied to Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail, which he wrote when he was arrested on Good Friday in 1963 in Birmingham. So their assignment is they each get 10 minutes on each of the last words. And we've been distributing in the church services at Cathedral, and people are welcome to drop by and pick them up. They're free copies of Martin Luther King's Birmingham jail letter. So we'll be doing that for Good Friday. And then Saturday, Easter Eve, we have a number of services also in English and Spanish, a couple of bilingual together. And then Easter Day, of course, 9, 11, 1. I understand it's the largest attended services of the year. And, these services that celebrate life, resurrection, I think are especially powerful in a context of a community that has experienced, variously at times, loss and death to the extent that we have. Resurrection isn't just a spiritual, metaphysical observance. It's a real celebration of life here and now. And I can't wait to see how we do it at the cathedral.
Oh, that's incredible. That's great. That's really special to have Bright and Perkins come together.
Well, we have students from both who come. And I think it's really important that they don't wait till they're in pulpit somewhere to learn how to speak. But I think tying the Good Friday observance to Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail, which is one of the most profound spiritual pieces of literature, I think, of the last century. There was a movement in the 70s by a group of ministers to have it added to the Bible, to the Christian Bible, to the New Testament, because it's a letter, an epistle, if you will. And it's such a summary statement about liberation. And to think that he wrote it in jail with no books available to him, having been arrested for protesting the segregation of department stores in Birmingham in 1963. It's a liberation template, I think, even for today. And I'll be excited to see what the students do in applying it to GLBT liberation.
Wow. Yeah. That'd be great just to come out of curiosity. You know, much less to.
Well,
to
noon
really
at the
get something out of
Interfaith
it.
Peace Chapel. Come see the students. Come hear the students.
Excellent.
That'll be interesting. I want to talk about. Let's talk a little bit about what at the cathedral surprised you when you got here. Was there anything in your job that you weren't expecting to do that you've done a lot of, or? And I have one thing in mind that I want to ask you, but I want to ask you that first.
Well, I think one of the things that surprised me was the complexity of it. It's not just 3 Sunday services. It's something happening 7 days a week, and it happens not only in the cathedral sanctuary, but on the entire campus. There are many groups also that meet there. And then there's a whole life off campus too, where people meet in people's homes, and there are cell groups that are meeting, and sometimes for as long as the last 20 years, they've been meeting weekly or twice a month in people's homes in suburban contexts. You know, one of the things I said I would do is go visit each of the circles when I first got here, and the minister hadn't done that for some years' time. So I found myself driving out to obscure parts of, you know, Irving or North Dallas, the other side of the 635, or places, and seeing the sort of, you know, anonymous tract houses in suburbs, and walking in and finding a living room full of gay men and lesbians and their friends who've been meeting for 20 years, you know, who've become real family for each other. So that surprised me, to see the depth of connection that takes place there, that isn't accounted for solely by asking when the services are. And the level of commitment. You know, people have built something there that they're very, very proud of. And I don't just mean a building. I mean a set of relationships that they're very deeply committed to. And coming from California, where I loved the place I worked, and I've loved every church I've worked in, but I have to say, people here are more deeply committed. They appreciate more the necessity for a liberation community like this.
And Pattie should be committed. But here's one of the questions that I had for you, that, and this was a surprise to our rabbi when we hired him several years ago. He expected to do quite a bit of counseling for people who, you know, had problems with their families, whatever, and with us it's been none. Not a single call for it. Speaking to some people, and
I'm not sure that's healthy, David. You know, just, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 getting some counseling would be probably a good thing.
Well, I'm sure David
I can
sees
think
them
of
specifically
once or twice a week.
I'm talking about specifically for rejection issues, though.
Okay.
You know, and he's done some counseling, but on other issues. But I'm talking about specifically having to do with rejection, and speaking to some of the people at some of the other churches that have become really very open and affirming. And really gone after getting in the gay community, because you really are just welcome here and part of who we are. What they say is, now, we don't have a lot of that here either, but the ones who come here, they're perfectly comfortable with their lives, with who they are. And there's a perception out in the community that, yeah, if you're still having some religious problems, Cathedral of Hope really is the place where they can take care of you.
Well, it is definitely a place where people who are struggling with the GLBT questions and their faith continue to come in large numbers. I mean, I was a little surprised for that coming from California, where I would agree with the assessment of some others. But here, people are still coming out. People are still struggling with growing up in the Church of Christ or the Southern Baptist Church, or in some cases some even more conservative environments. And just the issue of, is it okay to be gay and Christian? You know, demographically, one surprise for me has been the numbers of older people, my age, that is, I speak of, who have been married previously, heterosexually, and who are just coming out now. This isn't science exactly, but in California, where most of my churches have been, it's less common to find people who have been married heterosexually and then coming out. I think there's enormous pressure here that doesn't exist in other parts of the country to the same extent.
Oh, absolutely. It's a societal
to get
expectation.
married, you know, just to get married. So I think that's an important piece. But, you know, one thing that happens is that people, and we work with them on this to adjust to their sexual orientation, whatever that might be, after a few years, there's the desire to develop your spiritual life doesn't go away. And we do as much work, I think, with people who are facing other life questions, aging, relationships unrelated to sexual orientation, HIV, or just life circumstances. Spirituality isn't just about finding it's okay to be gay, and, if it works well for you, it helps you your whole life long. And you find the need from time to time to develop it to like a muscle, so that it remains current and vibrant and relevant.
You're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 KNON-fm. I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with the late Patti Fink. We're talking to the Reverend Jim Mitulski. He's the interim pastor at Cathedral of Hope. We'll be back with more Lambda Weekly right after this.
Hey folks, this is BP reminding you that KNON's inaugural Chili Cook-Off and Concert is just around the corner. Brought to you by Chase's Place, Gold Teeth Music, Republic Tequila, and Tolbert's and Grapevine. That's Sunday, April 13th at the historic Sons of Herman Hall, featuring Houston Marchman, Mike Stinson, and the Hash Brown Blues Band. Come out for an afternoon of great music, good people, and of course, those big old bowls of red. Tickets are available at knon.org and Tolbert's and Grapevine. Don't wait, this event will sell out. To register your team, knon.org, or call 214-828-9500 extension 224. Winner receives an automatic bid to Terlingua. Tolbert's rules apply. That's Houston Marchman, Mike Stinson, the Hash Brown Blues Band, Sunday, April 13th at the historic Sons of Herman Hall, 3414 Elm Street in Deep Ellum. This is a KNON benefit event brought to you by Chase's Place, Gold Teeth Music, Republic Tequila, and Tolbert's and Grapevine.
KNON is always looking for public service announcements to run on the air and for the DJs to read live. If you are a nonprofit group with a 501c3 and have something you want to be on air, then visit our website, knon.org. The menu on the left-hand side has a link for submitting PSAs to the station labeled PSA Request. Fill out the form with as much information as possible in your PSA copy, hit submit, and we will take it from there. It's a great way to connect your nonprofit group, the voice of the people KNON, and the community together.
Hi, this is Patti Fink, and you're listening to Lambda Weekly on 89.3 KNON-fm.
And I'm Dave Taffet here in the studio with the late Patti Fink, and Jim Mitulski is our guest. He's the interim pastor at Cathedral of Hope. He'll be with us through the rest of this year. I don't mean here at Lambda Weekly. I mean over at Cathedral of Hope. Hopefully you'll stay in Dallas a little bit longer than that.
Although KNON is in a building that the cathedral used to occupy.
We were talking about that just before the show. Yeah. Before Cathedral of Hope moved into the new cathedral, they occupied this building. The first floor was the sanctuary, and our studio was, I think, Michael Piazza's office.
When we move to our next building, you're welcome to
ours.
We
can have that one. That would be nice. And we can bring our equipment up into the 1990s then.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you just got back from El Salvador.
Yeah, I was on part of a faith delegation that was also gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. So unusual, really, in the context of El Salvador. And we were there at the invitation of particularly transgender groups, both to observe the anniversary of Archbishop Romero's assassination in 1980, and also to advocate with them, with law enforcement officials and with their legislators and with religious people for the protection of transgender people in particular. El Salvador is a somewhat violent culture, and there's very little prosecution for crimes of violence, hate crimes. That expression barely even exists. For crimes of violence against transgenders, many of whom are, or some of whom are engaged in sex work. So it is not unusual for there to be 10 or 12 murders a month and for them to go entirely uninvestigated and unprosecuted. So we had a very specific mission of being with them in solidarity, having American interest. You know, it shouldn't be this way, but the truth is the fact that we were Americans and that we were religious meant a great deal in that context to the people with whom we were meeting, and to the transgender and other GLBT people we were meeting with. It meant a lot for them to see our interest in what's happening with them. We went to a cemetery outside of San Salvador where Tanya Vasquez, a local transgender activist who'd been murdered almost a year ago, and there's been no arrest and no investigation yet.
That's just
was buried, and we laid wreaths on her grave. And I realized we were able to do this because there were 40 or 50 of us all together, but the protection of Americans mixed in made it possible for us to do this public display, and it is unspeakable. It is like, it's like a prior era, let's just say, in terms of the lack of protection. There's enormous disdain for GLBT people. Also, in El Salvador, women can't get abortions. It is illegal to have an abortion. A woman who is accused of and convicted of having an abortion is sentenced to 6 to 8 years in prison routinely. Wow. So it's a very different political climate, and religion plays an unfortunate and large regressive dimension to that. And it's part of the American legacy. We did terrible things in El Salvador all through the 80s and 90s, and we funded a war against the people of El Salvador for fear that they would become communists, for lack of a better word. It seems absurd when you visit there that this Cold War leftover paradigm was active. But when you see, as I did go to several massacre sites, and realize, oh my God, I mean, I was a taxpayer in the 1980s. My money paid for widespread massacre, literal massacre. And we've just got to turn around what our legacy has been. So I promised them that I would remind people, as I did this morning in my sermon, about what the U.S. did in El Salvador and what we're still doing there. And I also expressed a commitment to the Salvadoran people who live here in Dallas. We've got to pay attention to our immigration laws. They are heinous. Undocumented workers are an important aspect of our economy, and it is only because of racism and prejudice and our willingness to rely on cheap undocumented labor that we allow this moral outrage of our immigration laws to take place. You know, the whole week that I was there, I kept thinking, God, let's transform our fervor right now and our momentum around GLBT equality into equal commitment to what's happening with immigrants in our midst and around women's reproductive rights. It was hard to feel too superior to El Salvador on the issues of immigration and women's reproductive rights while I was there, when I thought about my Texas context, you know.
Well, even on LGBT issues, I mean, it was like 1988 that we had the Judge Hampton sentencing of someone who killed 2 gay men. And he said they're just homosexuals, and that were killed, you know. Wow. And so he sentenced them to something very, very light. Well, it's likened them to prostitutes. And so when you say some transgender sex workers, because that's the profession they have to pursue, or one of the only ones they can pursue, and they just blow it off and don't even pursue any sort of investigation, just breaks my heart. But I have to remember that wasn't all that long ago in our own city here. You know, that kind of attitude prevailed in the legal system.
Yeah, in the legal system among an elected, with an elected official. Not just, some stupid, uneducated person. Right. Well, he was a stupid, uneducated person, but that's beside the point. But he was
and he
elected.
Got kicked out.
He did get kicked out by a lesbian.
Yay.
So,
but that's...
Well, the legacy of Archbishop Romero and dissent that was so inspiring is still also present there. I was very glad to see that. But the church is no longer on the side of the poor in El Salvador. They've purged anything that they can that associates themselves with Romero and with the movement for revolution. But they can't repress it. We were there for Romero Day. People poured into the Metropolitan Cathedral there, and you really had a strong sense that San Romero, as they say, Saint Romero, still lives. And that gave me inspiration too.
So you're talking about 2 churches then. The church has rejected the pursuit of fixing poverty, but there was another church that you did meet in.
Well, there are churches that are underground churches, and then the Protestants, a few of the Protestant churches there, the Anglican Church in particular, is the church that gay people go to. And I was so grateful. You know, it's so interesting to be coming from here in Dallas, where the Episcopal Church is ambivalent around its reputation for welcoming gay people.
Well, several, the Fort Worth branch broke off.
I know, it's like something in the water there. That's just not what I expect from Episcopalians, you know. And I grew up as a Catholic. I became an Episcopalian in college in part because of women's ordination and because I knew it was liberal. You could have your mind as well as your soul in the Episcopal Church. But in El Salvador, that message has filtered through, and the Episcopal Church is seen as the queer church. I love that. I want to come back here and tell my Episcopalian friends, guess what? Your reputation is intact.
And same-sex marriage began today in England and Wales, but not in the Anglican Church in Great Britain. It's prevented by law in the Anglican Church, which is kind of odd. So,
well, time to act up, fight back, I say.
We've seen a whole lot of equality going on just this week. Or last week, Michigan's equality or marriage law was overturned, basically because the people testifying were that dumb. They were that bad. Best case ever, because you know, the judge just lit into each and every one of the witnesses and you know, called them not credible,
like unbelievably.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. And true words.
They could not make their own case.
Right.
And it was such a bad case that the state put on that the judge didn't even bother putting a stay on it because, you know.
The argument they had for the stay was even so bogus
dumber.
That, you know, he said,
no.
Can't do that either.
So 300 couples got married. Finally, on Sunday, there was a stay that was put on. But now the state is saying they're not going to recognize those marriages that they did the day before, but the federal government is.
Yeah,
this is such a mess. I love it. It keeps us in business. What's your take on what's going on?
I'd love to see Texas set a standard, do something unexpected. I want to see clerks issuing marriage licenses, and I think it could happen here. Even if they're of questionable legal status, you know, sometimes laws change because people break them, or
That's what happened in New Mexico.
Yeah, exactly. If that could happen in New Mexico, why can't it happen here? I do think that we need to hold our elected officials, especially in places like Dallas, to a higher standard, not a lower standard.
And when I say what that happened in New Mexico, it was one county clerk in down in Las Cruces, you know, and I hate to call him an old curmudgeon, but I talked to him, and I gotta love him, but you know.
Yeah, but we love old curmudgeons.
Well, but you know, his attitude was, well, I didn't see any reason I couldn't do it. And that's what, you know.
And history is going to judge him right.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
Of course they
in rereading the letter from Birmingham jail from Martin Luther King that I said we've been using at Cathedral during Lent, you know, what sparked that was a letter from 8 liberal Birmingham clergymen who took out a full-page ad in the Birmingham newspaper the week before Martin Luther King came there and said, "You're an outside agitator. Let us take our own time. Stop pressing. The time is not quite right yet. Just wait a little bit longer. Be patient." And history has shown them to be morally bankrupt, and they were the liberals, you know. And I think that that's going to be how this time in history is seen. There's no reason why Dallas couldn't be a trendsetter, and I think the will is here, and the support of the people is here.
It's certainly kind of got the ball rolling here too with Judge Tina Callahan's ruling.
She was the first one to rule, and do you want to explain what that ruling was?
It was a case where a male couple had been married in another state, a legal marriage in that state, came back to Texas, and at some point decided to divorce. And so they took their divorce to her family court, and she ruled the Prop 2 amendment from 2005 unconstitutional. And
which is odd for a family court judge to do, but she had to do that in order to rule on the case.
Yeah, and so that she could provide with them a divorce. And, you know, of course, our Attorney General at the time, and still is, Greg Abbott, had to chime in because he can't ignore this you know, family court case in Dallas County. He's got to jump in and say something. And, you know, but that got the ball rolling.
He appealed. It's now in front of the Supreme Court. We're waiting for their ruling.
And there are other cases that arose then from Travis County and other places. And so there are several of them, you know, threading their way through the court
It's such an exciting time to be involved in liberation work, especially because for many of us, I think we never really anticipated seeing these changes. I mean, I know all through the 80s and 90s I was doing gay weddings all the time, and it wasn't even a value for us about whether or not they'd become legal. In fact, we kind of liked that they were extra legal, if you will. They had a certain meaning. Yeah, kind of a bohemian, subterranean. We're doing this because we want to. And people were envious of that. Who, you know, when straight people often were at gay weddings, they would say, this means so much more, you know, somehow. And they would cry and there would be more emotion. And it's the same ceremony that we would use for gay or straight couples. But
that's like last summer, my cousins got married and they decided to have a gay wedding. Not because they're gay, they're a straight couple. It's just a better wedding. Yeah.
There you go. So much better.
It's just better.
Well, I can remember when, you know, the fight for 2106, and if you're not from Texas, you may not be familiar with the homosexual conduct law. That was the subject of Lawrence v. Texas, where all of the laws were overturned. And in Texas, that was 2106, and we were fighting that for years. In fact, that's where the origins of the Allen Ross Freedom Parade began, was when that was first overturned in September. That's why we have it in September. The Pride Parade.
Oh, okay.
Because of the, you know, Judge Jerry Buckmeyer overturned it. And, you know, that was what I thought, well, in my lifetime, maybe we'll get 2106 overturned. And then, boom, there it was. And then I thought, okay, now we're going to get ENDA, you know, Employment Non-Discrimination Pass. I never dreamed that relationship recognition would leap over, you know.
And just to show how things have changed legally, in the Tennessee ruling a couple of weeks ago, there's a stay in that ruling. Now, most of the stays are saying, okay, the marriage law is unconstitutional, and so while the law is unconstitutional, no marriages will go on until it's decided by a higher court. The Tennessee ruling said the three couples that are suing, there's no reason for the state not to recognize it, so as the case goes on, the state will recognize these. So the stay was for us, not for the state, which is complete opposite, and had never been done that way before in one of the rulings. So things are moving and they're changing every week. There's just something new going on, which, like you said, it's just exciting to watch.
It is, and I think this is a chance for us also to bring to the whole marriage discussion, what is it that we know about marriage, you know, about being together in sickness and in health, and what is it that we know about the complexity of how you gauge or measure fidelity. I think that there's more to happen or to unfold in our discussions in society around what marriage means. And we won't just be asking to be included in the discussion. I think that we'll be shaping in some positive ways what we've learned about what it means to sustain relationships, not solely because they're legally sanctioned, but because we're really deeply committed to each other.
And I think that's a huge thing that we do offer, because a lot of relationships in our community, people have been together for, you know, decades and decades, and many heterosexual marriages don't last long at all. And what do you do in all of those decades? Each one of those moments in every decade that people have been together has been in the face of adversity, because the society's never been approving of their relationship.
Right.
And so we have a lot to learn about. How do you stay together in the face of adversity? And we have, I think, a lot of things we've learned, and a lot of things we could share for heterosexual marital success, so to speak.
Yep.
That's a good point.
Jim, we're out of time. I want to thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed conversation with both of you, and thank you for the chance to talk about Cathedral of Hope.
Before you leave, come join us again.
Yeah,
I definitely
come back.
will.
Yeah,
You're just a couple of blocks. Stop.
I am. In your future home.
Oh, yeah, in our future home, indeed.
And
Thank you.
That's all we have today on Lambda Weekly. We'll be back next week with more.
KNON 89.3 FM in Dallas and Fort Worth, the voice of the people.
Business owners, tell KNON's listeners about your business. You can put your business or event on KNON. KNON currently has space available to run announcements for you. Tell KNON's listeners about your goods, services, nightclub, concert, or event. Help keep the voice of the people on the air while putting your information on the air. KNON's been named the #1 radio station in Dallas by both the Dallas Observer and D Magazine. Put your business with Dallas's #1 station. Call now for more information at 214-828-9500, extension 227, or extension 233. For more information, go to KNON.org and click on the Run Spots on KNON page. It's a great way for your business to support community radio while letting more people know about you.